Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I want you to imagine a moment when two global powers, tied by history, trade, and interest, suddenly find themselves at a crossroad. Allegations flying, tariffs rising, trust questioned. That moment is now, because what the Prime Minister of India just said, and how he said it, has left many Americans stunned, some defensive, and many watching closely to see whether diplomacy will crack or strengthen. The trade tensions between the United States and India have entered a phase that is as heated as it is complex. At the center of this storm are the steep tariffs imposed by Washington, which it justifies as reciprocal measures against what it sees as India's unfair trading practices and energy partnerships that do not align with U.S. policy. Some of these tariffs, particularly on certain Indian exports, have been raised to nearly 50%. For industries on both sides, this is not a marginal adjustment. It is a crippling surcharge that directly affects competitiveness, pricing, and the livelihood of workers whose jobs depend on exports. The situation escalated when India refused to bow to pressure over its energy imports from Russia. For the US, already embroiled in geopolitical rivalries, India's decision to purchase discounted Russian oil in the middle of global tensions felt like a defiance of American strategy. But for India, the reasoning was simple. National interest comes first. Energy security cannot be sacrificed to satisfy another country's geopolitical agenda, no matter how powerful that country may be. This clash of perspectives, Washington's demand for alignment and New Delhi's insistence on sovereignty, is what has hardened into a trade confrontation. The tariffs are not just numbers on paper, they ripple through economies and societies. Indian exporters of steel, aluminum, pharmaceuticals, and even agricultural products have felt the sting. In return, India has the option to raise its own barriers, creating a tit-for-tat spiral that punishes consumers and producers alike. American businesses that rely on cost-effective imports from India are now faced with rising expenses, and U.S. consumers will eventually shoulder that burden. On the Indian side, manufacturers lose access to one of their biggest markets, which slows growth, reduces jobs, and dampens investor confidence. In the end, what is supposed to be a reciprocal punishment turns into mutual economic self-harm. But these tariffs go beyond economics. They cut into the fabric of diplomacy. The United States and India have for years described their relationship as a strategic partnership, one that is meant to go beyond transactional trade. Both nations need each other. Washington sees India as a vital counterbalance to China in Asia, while New Delhi values American technology, capital, and global influence. When tariffs of 50% enter this equation, it sends a contradictory message as partnership on paper, but pressure in practice. It undermines trust and creates doubts about whether goodwill gestures and warm words can withstand the reality of economic weapons being used in negotiations. For India's leadership, this is not just about the balance sheet. It is about national pride and asserting independence in the global order. Accepting high tariffs without resistance would signal weakness, while retaliating demonstrates resolve. India has therefore labeled these measures as unjustified and unreasonable, reminding the world that it will not be strong-armed into compliance. The underlying message is clear: friendship does not mean submission, and strategic ties cannot be dictated through coercion. The longer these tariffs remain in place, the deeper the damage will be. What began as a dispute over oil purchases and trade imbalances risks hardening into a long-term rift, unless both sides find a way back to the table. For now, the rhetoric is sharp, the policies are harsh, and the world is watching whether these two democracies can reconcile their differences before their economic rivalry overshadows their strategic partnership. India's response to the recent strain in relations has been rooted firmly in the principle of strategic autonomy, a philosophy that has long guided its foreign policy. For New Delhi, the message is clear: it will not allow itself to be boxed into choices dictated by other powers, even when the pressure comes from a long-standing partner like the United States. The Prime Minister's words have underscored this reality. By acknowledging the importance of friendship and partnership, while at the same time refusing to compromise on matters of sovereignty. India is signaling that it values cooperation, but not at the cost of independence. This balancing act is not new. For decades, India has carefully managed its relations with global powers, avoiding entanglement in rigid alliances while cultivating ties with multiple partners. Whether it was maintaining defense relations with Russia, expanding trade with the European Union, or deepening security cooperation with the United States, India has consistently sought to widen its options. The current tensions have only highlighted the depth of this strategy. Rather than succumbing to one-sided demands, India has leaned on its global partnerships to diversify its avenues of growth and security. By doing so, it reinforces its identity as a nation that takes decisions on its own terms, not under duress. Strategic autonomy in this moment also carries domestic significance. By pushing back against external pressure, the leadership demonstrates to its citizens that India's interests will not be sacrificed. This resonates strongly with a population that takes pride in national sovereignty and expects its leaders to act with strength on the world stage. The narrative is as much for the domestic audience as it is for foreign capitals. India will engage with partners respectfully, but will not bow to dictates. This message strengthens the government's credibility at home and enhances its leverage abroad. At the same time, India has not turned away from partnership. In fact, it has emphasized the need for forward-looking engagement. By describing ties with the United States as very positive, despite the disagreements, and by openly appreciating remarks about friendship and goodwill, India has signaled that it does not wish to escalate confrontation unnecessarily. This is a carefully measured approach. On one hand, it rejects policies that it deems unfair, such as punitive tariffs. On the other, it keeps the door open for dialogue, reminding the world that India seeks cooperation, not isolation. This dual approach also aligns with India's broader global strategy. It continues to strengthen its role in multilateral organizations like reshape, the SCO, and the G20, while simultaneously building bilateral partnerships in the Indo-Pacific, the Middle East, and Africa. Such diversification ensures that even if relations with one partner become strained, India has other avenues to pursue its goals. Energy deals with Russia, defense cooperation with France, technology partnerships with Japan, and supply chain initiatives with Australia are all part of this web of relationships that give India both flexibility and strength. Ultimately, this posture reflects a maturing power that refuses to be cornered. India is not rejecting the United States, nor is it blindly aligning with others. It is asserting a simple truth: partnerships must be built on mutual respect, not coercion. This insistence on autonomy, while simultaneously investing in strong global ties, is what allows India to project confidence in the face of pressure and to emerge as a nation charting its own course in an increasingly fractured world. Friendship between nations is often tested not in times of celebration, but in moments of strain. The relationship between India and the United States stands exactly at such a crossroads today. On the surface, both countries still call each other partners, still invoke the language of shared values and democratic ties, and still emphasize cooperation across technology, defense, and trade. Yet, beneath this polished exterior, frictions have begun to emerge, pressing both sides to demonstrate whether their friendship is built merely on convenience or on deeper trust. The Prime Minister of India has made it a point to remind the world that even amid these pressures, goodwill remains intact, but it cannot be separated from dignity and respect. This duality captures the essence of diplomacy under pressure. On one hand, the United States, in pursuit of its geopolitical and economic priorities, has chosen to wield tariffs and public criticism. On the other, India has responded not with outright hostility, but with firmness tempered by courtesy. The Prime Minister's words, acknowledging America's expressions of goodwill while simultaneously rejecting unfair policies, illustrate a fine balance between standing ground and preserving dialogue. This is a calculated message: disagreements are real, but they need not destroy the foundation of friendship. Diplomacy thrives on nuance, and India's approach embodies precisely that. By fully reciprocating, Remarks about goodwill from American leaders, New Delhi signals to Washington that the broader relationship remains valuable. At the same time, labeling the tariffs justified and reasonable sends a warning that friendship cannot mean compliance at the expense of national interest. It is this blend of affirmation and resistance that keeps communication alive while making clear the limits of tolerance. The tone matters as much as the content. India has avoided inflammatory rhetoric or outright threats, choosing instead to reinforce the principles of partnership, even while challenging the actions that undermine it. For Washington, this poses an important question: how far can economic coercion go before it starts to damage a strategic relationship it claims to prize? For India, the challenge is to push back strongly enough to defend sovereignty while not allowing ties to collapse. The tension between these goals defines diplomacy under pressure. Each statement, each policy move is scrutinized by both domestic and international audiences, and the stakes extend beyond trade. The credibility of both governments is on the line. The symbolism of this moment also cannot be overlooked. India, once seen as a junior partner in global affairs, is now engaging the United States as an equal, willing to challenge and negotiate rather than silently accept. Friendship, in this sense, is not about obedience, but about mutual recognition of strength. The world is watching whether the US can accept such an independent partner, or whether it demands conformity as the price of cooperation. India's insistence on respect suggests that the partnership will survive only if it evolves into a relationship between equals. In the end, friendship and diplomacy under pressure reveal the resilience of ties that are truly valuable. They show whether nations are capable of disagreeing without breaking, of criticizing without collapsing, of defending interests while keeping channels open. India's words in this moment carry precisely that spirit, offering both reassurance and resistance in equal measure, ensuring that the path of dialogue remains open even in the storm of disagreement. National pride is often the invisible force behind the words of a leader, and in the case of India's recent stance, it is the cornerstone of every message directed both inward and outward. When the Prime Minister speaks of defending sovereignty, rejecting unfair tariffs, or asserting independence in energy policy, he is not merely conducting foreign policy, he is speaking to the heart of a nation that places immense value on dignity. For millions of Indians, the expectation is clear: their leaders must not falter under external pressure, no matter how powerful the other side may be. This sentiment shapes the tone, the choice of words, and even the posture of India's response. Messaging in such moments is crafted with precision. On the global stage, the language must be diplomatic, respectful, and measured, but at home it must resonate with the emotion of resilience. Indians have grown accustomed to narratives of struggle and self-reliance, rooted in a history of colonial subjugation and subsequent independence. To them, every time a leader stands firm against external dictates, it revives the collective memory of past victories over domination. Thus, when the Prime Minister emphasizes that India will make decisions based on its own interests, it is more than a policy statement, it is a symbolic affirmation of national identity. Domestic audiences interpret these messages not only as practical strategies, but as reflections of strength and character. In the face of criticism from abroad, Indian citizens take pride in hearing their leader acknowledge friendship with a major power, while making it clear that submission is not an option. It reassures them that the government is capable of navigating complex pressures without sacrificing self-respect. In a nation of over 1 billion people, such reassurance strengthens political legitimacy, bolsters confidence in leadership, and nurtures a sense of collective solidarity. The applause within the country becomes as important as the reaction abroad. This dynamic also explains why strong language resonates so deeply. Phrases that stress independence or frame policies as a matter of national interest are not simply rhetorical flourishes. They are calculated to reinforce unity at home. By presenting India's stance as a matter of pride rather than mere policy, the government taps into the emotional wellspring of patriotism. Citizens do not feel like passive observers of international disputes, they feel like participants in a national struggle to maintain dignity on the global stage. Messaging of this kind also carries a forward-looking dimension. It signals to the world that India is no longer a passive recipient of global policies, but an active shaper of its own destiny. To its people, it conveys that their nation is finally being recognized as a global power capable of defending its own interests. In both contexts, the subtext remains the same. India will not be lectured, it will not be cornered, and it will not be reduced to silence. When leaders speak with such conviction, the domestic audience absorbs the message as an affirmation of their own worth. National pride is reinforced not just by victories in trade or diplomacy, but by the perception that India's voice is heard, respected, and unwavering. This is the deeper significance of the messaging. It is as much about policy as it is about identity, shaping how Indians see themselves and how they believe the world should see them. India's global strategy is increasingly defined by its determination to act as a self-reliant yet interconnected power, balancing immediate national needs with long-term global ambitions. The recent trade tensions with the United States have not diverted this trajectory, but instead highlighted why such a strategy is essential. In an international system marked by rivalries, shifting alliances, and economic uncertainty, India is working to craft a role that does not depend on the goodwill of one partner, but draws strength from a web of diverse relationships. This approach ensures flexibility and resilience, making India less vulnerable to external shocks and pressure. A key pillar of this strategy lies in multilateral engagement. India has deepened its role within groups like BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and the G20. These platforms allow it to amplify its voice on critical issues such as trade, energy security, climate change, and global governance. By asserting itself in such forums, India positions itself not just as a participant but as a shaper of global debates. The aim is to show that India is indispensable to any serious discussion about the future of world order, whether it concerns economics, security, or technology. Equally important is the focus on regional partnerships. India has invested heavily in initiatives across the Indo-Pacific, recognizing the region as the heart of the 21st century strategic competition. Collaborations with countries like Japan, Australia, and Vietnam demonstrate that New Delhi is committed to building a stable, rules-based regional order that resists dominance by any single power. These ties are complemented by growing defense and technology exchanges, which expand India's influence while also contributing to its domestic modernization. Energy security remains another central theme of India's future outlook. The decision to continue importing Russian oil despite criticism reflects a pragmatic calculation. India's economy cannot thrive without affordable energy. By diversifying suppliers across the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America, while simultaneously investing in renewable energy at home, India seeks to insulate itself from volatility in global markets. This dual track of immediate security and long-term sustainability reflects a vision that combines pragmatism with foresight. Economically, India's outlook is ambitious. It is not only resisting external pressures, but also working to increase trade volumes, integrate into global supply chains, and attract foreign investment. Initiatives like Make in India and digital infrastructure expansion aim to transform the country into a hub of manufacturing and innovation. By aligning its domestic goals with international partnerships, India hopes to create a virtuous cycle that strengthens both its economy and its global standing. Diplomatically, India's strategy is built on the principle of multi-alignment rather than non-alignment. Unlike during the Cold War, when neutrality often meant limited influence, today India actively cultivates ties with multiple powers simultaneously. It engages with the US on defense and technology, partners with Europe on trade and climate initiatives, maintains legacy defense ties with Russia, and works with emerging economies across Asia and Africa. This ensures that no single country has leverage to dictate India's choices, and it expands New Delhi's role as a bridge between developed and developing worlds. Ultimately, India's future outlook rests on confidence. It sees itself not as a follower but as a rising power with the right to chart its own course. By blending strategic autonomy with active partnership, India is laying the foundation for a global role that is both independent and influential, ensuring that it cannot be ignored in the calculations of any major power. So let me leave you with this. When your friend criticizes you, what do you do? Do you cave? Do you attack back blindly? Or do you hold your ground, speak with respect, but make clear what you will and will not accept? That is the moment we are in. And the words spoken were neither placation nor provocation. They were a declaration of dignity, a drawing of the red line. To everyone tuning in, from Delhi, New York, Washington, or anywhere in between, this moment is more than headlines. It's a test of patience, of principle, of whether nations can engage with honesty. Whatever the outcome, let this be remembered: when pushed, India did not freeze, it spoke. And when speaking, it chose strength. Thank you for hearing me, because the consequences of what was said will echo much further than words.